Good evening. My name is Kevin Canese, and I am the supervisor for our CPED Single Family Project Coordination Team. And thank you for joining us today as we do our application walkthrough session for our Minneapolis Homes financing, notice of funding availability, and our unfunded city-owned property sale applications. We will be recording today's presentation and posting it on the city's website along with the slides with this presentation. Questions can be asked via the chat question box and will be moderated during the presentation. Otherwise, people can wait to ask their questions at the end of the presentation. This evening, we will be covering the application options that are available, which includes our city-owned unfunded property purchase program and our Minneapolis Homes financing program for 1 to 20 unit homeownership projects. We'll briefly cover the timeline for the application and the process once you've submitted an application. We will cover the application web pages and show you how to navigate those. We will talk through applying for city-owned property, regardless of if you're asking for funding or financing from the city. And then we will talk about applying for financing for homeownership projects specifically. There are two different application options that we are advertising and we'll be walking through today. The first is our city-owned property purchase program. And that program is for both unfunded homeownership or rental housing development. The link, which we'll be viewing today, can be found on this slide. And then we'll also be covering our Minneapolis Homes financing program, which is specifically for 1 to 20 unit homeownership projects. And we will be going over that application today as well. Before covering the applications, we want to make sure that we're highlighting some key dates that you would want to be aware of if you're looking to apply. One of the most important dates, of course, is when is the application due? And so our application, regardless of which application pathway you choose, is Friday, January 7th by 1:00 p.m. You would submit your application documents to Minneapolis Homes at minneapolismn.gov. And please keep in mind that Minneapolis in the Minneapolis Homes is MPOS. Proposals are then sent to the applicable neighborhood organizations for a 45-day comment and review period. And the neighborhoods may invite you to attend a meeting of theirs to present your plans to the neighborhood. We then take the feedback that's received from the neighborhoods and use that along with our scoring criteria to make project recommendations to City Council. And we expect that those recommendations will go to City Council by the second quarter of 2022. If your project is approved for sale, if you're looking at purchasing city-owned property, and financing, if you're looking at also seeking financing, you would, or I should say, if you're looking at purchasing city-owned property, you would sign a redevelopment agreement. And as part of that redevelopment agreement, you would pay a good faith deposit of 10% of the purchase price or $2,000, whichever is greater. And then finally, depending on the size of your project, we would expect that you would be completing and either selling or having occupancy in 2023 or 2024. So before we jump into the kind of the high-level program webpage information, we're going to just quickly highlight what every application needs. And so this is consistent with whether or not you are applying for just purchasing city-owned property without city financing, or if you're applying for property with city financing. And so the documentation that you would need to provide is the city's application document, which we will walk through today. Documentation of financing, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail depending on whether or not you're asking for funding or not. You would then also submit an offer to purchase if you're looking at purchasing city-owned property, or if you have a privately owned site that you're looking on receiving city financing for, then you would submit documentation of site control. You would submit a proforma, or if it's a rental development that's non-funded, it would be a proforma cash flow. And then construction plans, which do not have to be full architectural scale drawings, but that do need to show your floor plans, your site plan, and basic elevations of the property. And then finally, we want you to have a evaluation of the property from either a broker's price opinion, an appraisal, or a competitive market analysis. And so now I am going to start by covering the program web pages. So I'm just going to switch my screens here, so if you'll bear with me just 1 second. Sorry for the delay here, it's just taking a second. There we go. So to start and to access the applications for either program, you would visit www.minneapolishomes.org. And that'll take you to this page that we're on right now. There are 2 application web pages that we are speaking to today. The city-owned property application, that's for our unfunded city-owned property that you can purchase. And then our affordable homeownership units, which is through the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program. So I'm going to click on Minneapolis Homes Financing first. And this is if you are asking for financing from the city. So the program webpage is laid out with applicable training materials. And so these are pre-recorded sessions similar to this that are then posted to the webpage. So there are YouTube videos that you can then watch. And then you can also see the presentation documents themselves. We have a couple different pathways with Minneapolis Homes Financing. There is the possibility of building new construction or rehabbing vacant property, or you may be stabilizing owner-occupied housing. And so there's a couple different presentations related to that. We also conducted earlier or late last month a question and answer session where participants asked questions of city staff related to the programs, and that may be useful to watch, or you can see or look at the presentation and see the responses in this document here. Each program webpage also has a program document section that includes the city's program manual for that program. So this is the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program Manual. And then it also has the program guidelines. And I'm going to actually open that up so you can see. So if I'm scrolling down, and the reason for that is on these program guidelines, we actually have a section that's called the criteria for selection. In this criteria for selection is how we evaluate projects. We then have these 2 links that will actually bring you down to here. So we have our development sites, which I'll touch on in just a second. And then we have some funding, sustainability certification funding incentive. If you're looking at building a home that's passive certified or net zero certified with a solar array that offsets the energy. And then an important document, which we'll cover a little bit more in detail, is the homeownership subsidy and affordable sales price limits. We have 2 property lists. So we have 1 to 3 unit city-owned development sites. And so if you're interested in developing a 1 to 3 unit property on a city-owned development site, you would click the plus on this and it will expand that list. And along with that comes a map of the properties, and you can actually click on an individual property in the map, or you can download the list itself. If you're looking to download the list, keep in mind that you would click this download button, and then to download it as Excel, you would click crosstab. And then you can select to download it in Excel format. Please keep in mind that this list is updated. We anticipate releasing a a couple additional properties to this list in the near future. And so there may be a few additional properties available. And in one or two cases, there's a property that's no longer available, this particular one being an example. So we do recommend that if you're reviewing the list that you go back and actually click on the link as this is updated. And we will send out a notification to our email listserv once the full update is completed. If you're looking at building a larger property, we have a 4+ unit city-owned development site. And so this has sites where you could build a 4-plex or larger type of development. The lists have the sites and they are priced as listed. They include information about the lot size, and we would encourage you as you're reviewing sites for your proposal to speak with our zoning department by calling Minneapolis 311 if you have questions on whether or not what you're proposing would fit on that site or meet the zoning requirements. And these property lists can be found on our city-owned property page as well. So there is that same information that's there. And then I'm actually going to go to that page because it also includes a list of vacant properties. So these are properties for rehab. We already conducted the open houses that you were required to attend in order to submit an offer and had over 40 individuals attend those open houses. If you did attend that open house, you should have or should be receiving here in the near future from my colleague Matthew, who will be speaking here in just a little bit, an opportunity to do a final inspection that will help you to develop your scope of work when you're submitting your application. And then on either page, if you scroll down past these development sites, you will find the section that is how to submit an offer. And Matthew's going to walk through more detail in just a second about how to apply for property regardless of financing. But before we do that, I want to make sure that I'm covering the application document as this is consistent throughout whether or not you're applying for city-owned property or if you're applying for city-owned property and for financing. I'm just going to open the application document here and share my screen. So this document is our city application document. And on the first page, it has a checklist of the different sections of this application document that you would need to complete. And so you'll see that there are ownership pathways that can include city financing, or there are ownership or rental pathways if you're not asking for city financing. The information that you have to provide varies depending on whether or not you're asking for financing or not. If you're not asking for financing, you just need to complete section 1, which is the project composition and applicant information sections. And so basically in those sections, what you're doing is describing your project and providing us details about the project, and then providing information about who you are as an applicant, providing information about your experience and your organizational experience, and speaking to those items. And then you are not required to provide more detail than that, although that is optional if you would like to provide more information that will help your application be more competitive. If you are applying for ownership pathway, there are additional sections that are required. So if you're looking at building or rehabbing a 1 to 20 unit home, there's a section for that. And then questions related to that would include the type of home you're building and whether or not it is a perpetually affordable home, which we'll cover in a little bit more detail, or a recapture home, which is a home that is providing down payment assistance that's recaptured after the sale to after the first buyer sells the home to their next buyer. Recapture is only available for lots that are owned by the city in North Minneapolis. So that's something to keep in mind.
Hey, Kevin, we got a question in the chat.
Sure.
Does an owner occupation pathway exist in the 4 to 20 unit category?
That's a great question. So a owner occupant could propose to build a 4 to 20 unit building. The thing that that individual applicant would need to consider is whether or not they can income qualify. So if an owner occupant is looking at applying to this program, their income has to be at or below 80% of area median income. We'll kind of walk through what that is here in a little bit more detail when I talk through specifically the ownership and subsidy limits that come with the financing. But effectively, that might be a challenge because we have to consider the net rent of those units that are being built and occupied by renters as income to the owner of that building. And that may or may not put that owner over the income limits. So that's something you'll want to kind of take a look at as you're putting together your proposal and looking at whether or not you would income qualify as an owner occupant.
To add on to that just a little further, it is possible for groups of owners to come together and apply as a cooperative as well.
Yes, thank you, Roxanne. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that would mean, but effectively we have a perpetually affordable housing program that's part of our financing. And if you were looking at doing a cooperative, you would submit new model documentation related to that, which is actually right where we are currently on the application webpage. I'm kind of trying to do a high level sort of overview of the application, and we'll go into a little bit more details about each specific applications here in just a second. And so if you're doing a proposal and asking for financing, we're going to ask you to fill out some more information. So this is information about the unit or units you're planning on constructing, the type of sales model that you're planning on doing. So that, like I covered, that's either perpetually affordable housing or recapture. The number of units and the income range that you're targeting. Information about whether or not you are going to do a certification above program requirements. And that would be applicable to the design of the home. So we require for 1 to 3 unit new construction that you're building to the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready program. And if you're looking at doing a project that exceeds that through one of these certifications, you can select that as well. And then I did show earlier a sustainability certification incentive exists for these 3 right here: the Passive Housing Institute, the Passive Housing Institute US, and the Net Zero Energy certifications. And then if you're building a 4+ unit project, it would be required to be meeting the green communities requirements. And then there's some additional things that you can commit to in your application, such as universal design. These are sections of the application that are not required for you to meet through your development, but if you do commit to them, it does create or make your application more competitive, and it is a scoring criteria we look at as part of our design requirements. And then if you're looking at doing a stabilization proposal, which is providing financing to stabilize households that are in occupied housing, that would be this section right here. And we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail as well. So effectively, this application is broken out into different sections. The first 2 sections are applicable to everyone. And then depending on if you're doing rehab or new construction, or if you're doing stabilization, there's additional sections you need to complete. This application itself hasn't changed significantly from last year or last application if you applied. So that's something to keep in mind if you're a previous applicant. And then there are some acknowledgements that you would complete as part of the application. And then this application also has a checklist of the additional documents that you would need to submit depending on the type of application you're doing. So it really serves as both not a document, or both as a document to show us what you're planning on doing, but also to help guide you in keeping track of the documentation you need to submit. So with that, I'm going to see if there are any questions before I turn it over to my colleague, Matthew.
I don't have anything in the queue. I do have a comment. It sounds like contacting a staff member might be helpful. I would just guess in regards to what category, I guess we need more clarity on what needs to be more described for who asked that question.
Brian, can I clarify? You're just asking for the individual that asked the most recent question to
correct. Yep.
Add a little bit more detail? Okay.
Yep, correct. Yep. I did have receive a question in the chat. Is there a number of units upper limit if the property is a stabilization property? I guess that's my question.
Yes, it is.
I guess I'll need more clarity in regard to the question. Is there a number of units upper limit? Yeah, more clarity in the chat.
For Minneapolis, here maybe I can provide a little bit more context. So we have two pathways. If you're looking at doing a stabilization proposal, currently the council has approved us to provide financing through Minneapolis Homes financing for 1 to 20 unit homeownership projects. So if you're looking at doing a stabilization proposal, in order to be funded through Minneapolis Homes financing, it would have to fit within that 1 to 20 unit range. And I think that answers the question that was asked, but feel free to ask a follow-up question if needed. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Matthew, who's going to talk through applying for city-owned property regardless of funding, including our property offers. So Matthew, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to let you take over.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I think we'll start with looking at probably the easiest thing to do. I shouldn't say easiest, might be hard for some people still. And that's the unfunded property purchases for our existing city-owned vacant structures. And so I'll start with that. I'm going to show, I'm going to also take off my screen. Okay, here we have, I use one example that everybody always asks about, 822 Elwood Avenue North. It's a 4-unit building, pretty rough shape, gonna take a lot of work on it, but I wanted to kind of walk through, you know, how to fill out this application. And as you'll notice on the first page, you do not send in any check for folks that are new and are looking to maybe rehab for ownership. No money is collected at the time. Make sure that when you're filling out the application, you put in the information exactly as it would appear on your deed or contract, because that's information that we will use to move forward if you're the selected developer. And then also one of the check means a completed detailed developer scope. And I want to just start here now. You will find on the website a sample of these pages. So you will find a sample for filling out these first basic pages. I wanted to share just a couple of quick things with you though. After page 1, on page 2, it is very important that this is not a do-it-yourself program. If you have the skills and you believe you can and have the time and can get it done within a year or less after taking acquiring the property, closing on the property. But the city really looks for folks who have either done this before or they have a licensed general contractor who can do this work. And so here is very, very important. Either you've got the skills and you can talk about them here, how many houses you've done in the last 2 years, or in this case, how many houses your licensed general contractor. Important to make sure that this part is filled out with their license number, because there is a lookup to see if that general contractor is in good standing with the state of Minnesota. As I said on part B here, a detailed listing of similar projects that you or your licensed general contractor have completed in the last 2 years. Oftentimes people will provide before and after pictures. I've had some people show me stuff on their phone of a bunch of after pictures. Look how wonderful this is. And I said, if you can't show me anything before, anybody can get those pictures off of the web. So if you're going to submit pictures, show before and after the same rooms or the same structure as an attachment. And as you said, you can attach additional information as needed. One other thing that's important is on the plan for occupancy. When it comes to rehab structures, and as those of the 40 or plus people who went out in the last couple of weeks ago saw, most of these rehab structures are single family. The priority for our city and that we see for many of the neighborhoods is, number one, to live in as a personal home or to sell exclusively to owner occupants. And so the priority is to increase home ownership. Number three, if your plan is just to sell without restrictions, there's less points as far as the criteria points. And number four, to hold it as a rental property is even less points. The highest priority would be those applicants who plan to be owner occupants or those developers who will bring an owner occupant with them to the table at the time of application. However, both the owner occupant as well as the one who's brought to the table should be aware that there are new income limitations for all City of Minneapolis properties. And as Kevin mentioned earlier, that 80% AMI for ownership. So that's something that will have to be either self-documented or that the developer has to document for his or her buyer. If you plan to sell the property, it's important to know that you have somebody who's skilled in moving these properties, and so that's important on plan for occupancy B. Or if you plan to lease the property, again, lowest priority, but still, do you have somebody who's skilled at leasing the property? Basically, you sign off and submit, date and sign and submit. Here we go to what we're calling the detailed developer scope of work. Again, after your name and the name of your general contractor, the address, and we're using against 822 Elwood as the example. It's approximately 5,200 finished square feet. Unfinished square feet is about 7,000 square feet because we have a huge basement that if somebody wants to potentially finish it, it could be, I don't know, it could not be additional rental units. The limit for Elwood is 4 units. And you could not add additional units there. You could make less, but you could not do more than 4 units at Elwood. And as you can see from this example, the existing number of units is 4, the proposed number of units is 4. The existing number of bedrooms, that's total number of bedrooms, is 8. That's 2 bedrooms in each unit. The proposed is 9, in which one of the units would have an additional bedroom. And the number of bathrooms existing is 4. And again, one of the units would have an additional bathroom as well. So as we go through this detailed development scope of work, you'll notice that, and this is what you're going to have an opportunity to do more than you did a couple of weeks ago, and that is to line by line go through exactly how much you or your general contractor estimate each of these costs are, as well as to be able to provide a detailed description of work. That detailed description of work, along with your pricing, is what operates as your scope in lieu of code compliance. A lot of folks that were new out for this program asked for, where's the code compliance report? Where's the code compliance report? For the Minneapolis Home Program, there is not a code compliance report. That's why it's so important to have an experienced person go through this with you and help you fill this out, because that will operate in lieu of the code compliance. What ends up happening is after the developer or the builder or you are chosen, this information will be used to submit to building inspections for everything that you do on this site. You can do more, but you cannot do less. Once you get approved based on this scope of work, you can do more, but you cannot do less. Now, as you can see here, it goes into detail about replace those broken steps that everybody saw at the front entry. Repair and replace the sidewalks as necessary. It talks about putting new parking pad in the rear. The stoop, overhang of the stoop that looks like it's kind of might fall down. What's going to happen with that? For those who walked through, you saw there's a huge hole in the roof, water damage, fire damage. How will you address that? And these numbers are not your numbers. These are numbers that were just pulled out of the air. Your licensed general contractor or experienced general contractor will have this. Again, no garage being built, but here's the plan based on an earlier line item about putting the asphalt in the back. Again, this is not a city requirement or recommendation, but several folks have looked at this, and the idea that you would have or bring out a licensed engineer to look at it and make recommendations could be helpful. It's not a requirement, but again, somebody who has it and has the information from that engineer might be looked at as taking this a little more seriously. Again, those numbers are just estimates that you may be able to find somebody who can do it for substantially less. Again, we started with the roof, now we're going to the basement, and then we'll do everything in between. So again, we're talking about, did you go down in the basement? Will you go down in the basement? What did you see? And what do you feel needs to be remediated, fixed, repaired, or replaced? Same with insulation. How much insulation will you do? Will you strip down all the way to the studs and insulate all the walls? Will you do just the minor insulation that's required? In this one on the detailed development scope of work, and we're working on fixing that, we couldn't show all of the details that we want to put in for doors and windows. But as you can see from this plan, it imagines replacing all of the windows in the structure with high efficiency, energy efficient windows. Again, the walls, floors, mold and trim, what's going to be kept, what's not. One of the things that this anticipates is putting in all new appliances, including washer and dryer in each unit, as well as all new kitchen appliances. Again, all new plumbing. It would be more helpful to have it broken down by each item, but in this case, they just put the one thing for $56,000 total. Your people coming out would probably want to do a line by line so you can see exactly what you're getting. Electrical the same way, and mechanical. In this case, they looked at the fact that the building was previously a radiant heating system, which is, used an old boiler. As you can tell by, if you've been in the basement, that boiler has been taken out, one of those old gravity boiler systems with asbestos and stuff. So it's no longer there. That's been taken out. But to replace that with a brand new energy efficient boiler, and then creating baseboards, a new modern baseboard cooling system or heating system, excuse me. One of the things this also took into consideration was opening up the exterior walls in each unit to put like a wall unit air conditioner in each unit. The units are approximately 1,100 to 1,200 square feet. So you're looking at air conditioning units that would have that capacity of 1,100 to 1,200 square feet at least. Again, lead paint is going to be a big test at the end of the project. They'll be testing, the city inspectors will test for lead dust. And so it should be, when you remove the old windows that possibly have lead, paint on them, how do you, remediate that is important. Asbestos, as we said, the major asbestos was already taken out by the city, but there's still, need for checking for other asbestos. Radon, which is normally done for new construction, because this proposes to break up that basement floor and put in a new floor, what's being done regarding radon testing, and then water or damage and mold, also a consideration. You'll note here that the total estimated work on the house only, which since there is no garage, is the same for both the house and the total of $451,640. Again, this is just a rough estimate. This is not to say this is how much you absolutely need to spend or should spend, but this is just a rough estimate. But you will see something interesting here. The total per square foot for a finished house. Just from basic information, when construction management sees less than, say, $60 a square foot, they think that the people are undercutting and are not really hitting the right number for rehab. So as you can see, this number is about $87 a square foot as the total cost for the finished part of the house for rehabbing. I want to stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Matthew, I have nothing in the queue right now for any questions.
Okay. I will go on next to showing how to fill out the rental proforma. Using the same example, as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to have a house that you're doing a rental for rent, you would just have less units, basically just the 1 unit or 2 units in the case where you have a duplex. But because we have 4 units here, we're going to try to see if we can share this screen now. Okay, so again, we're taking 822 Elwood as the example. It has in this example, there would be 3 2-bedroom units. So keeping those existing 2-bedroom units, approximate unit size is about 1,200 square feet. And then 1 3-bedroom unit, that would be maybe the owner's unit that they would increase to 3 bedrooms. The proposed monthly rent that we use is based upon the monthly gross rent limits set by Hennepin County for affordable units. So in this case, the most that could be charged for a 2-bedroom unit is $1,417. The most that could be charged for a 3-bedroom unit is $1,636. You note that we did not put in utility allowances. That can be considered, but your totals would still not be able to exceed those 2 numbers. So if you want to break it out and say, okay, this is how much we're charging for utilities and have those numbers, you'll see further down, there's an example of what you might want to do for utilities. You could say for a 3-bedroom triplex rental with natural gas, heat, $33 a month for heating, $4 a month for cooking, $46 for lights and appliances, $13 for AC. So approximately a total of $157.80 a month. That's how much you would have to reduce this number by in order to still get that total. If you put $157.80 in here, this number would have to be reduced to make a total of $157.80, or for 3 units in this case, $4,251, because they're looking at 60% AMI. This presupposes that 3-bedroom unit is going to be the owner occupant unit. And so the owner occupant says that out of the rents, they will pay $1,636 a month as the 80% AMI occupant, or again, annually $51,000 and $19,000 a year. So again, the total proposed monthly rent, about $3,053. The gross monthly rent for these 2 units, or for all 4 units, is $5,887, and then annually about $70,644. In this case, because it's an owner occupant, they weren't charging themselves in a management fee or administrative fee, but they understood that there were going to be some costs for operating this building. So they estimated about $1,000 a year in maintenance expenses, which breaks out to $83.33 a month. They estimated that out of those monies that they collected, out of that $70,000 they collected, they would have to pay about $9,600 a year or $200 a month in utilities per unit. They estimated about $50 a month per unit in escrows to replacement reserves and other things like that. And then real estate taxes about $1,500 a year or $31 a month per unit. So they figured that their annual projected cost for operating was about $14,500. Again, these are not hard and fast numbers. You would be able to come up with your own numbers. Their annual debt service, they figured, and we'll go to that page next, they figured to be about $29,185 a year. You remember that 451,640? Here's where you'll find it again, and this is something that all folks have to do. Excuse me, all folks who are doing rental have to do. And so they said, okay, we had Elwood's price acquisition land cost was $125,000. Closing fees approximately $4,300. Total acquisition cost, and then here's the construction contract. This is what it costs to redo this property. Looked at interest during construction, taxes, insurance, title, and recording. Again, these are estimates. These are not hard and fast. The total and soft cost came to $18,800 for a total development budget of about $599,815. So just under $600,000. So when we look at our sources, the folks are going to a bank for their construction loan. The bank is saying you have to pay, okay, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This number I messed up. I'm supposed to have one more number in here. I gotta fix that. So I messed up a little bit. I was supposed to be $20,994 subtracted from $599,815. And so let me see if I can fix that right now. I'll fix that number right now. And I guess this is a valuable lesson. You can always fix stuff. Oh, that still doesn't come out right. What is it? I don't know what's happening. 5, 7, 8. Oh, I forgot 1, 8. There we go. I missed 1, 8 here. Okay, so the next thing also, it calculates for you your 15-year cash flows. So those numbers that we entered on the other sheets, the income expenses, the sources, and the development budget all comes out here in the 15-year cash flow. Easy thing to miss, but pay attention to it, please, so that your application doesn't come back as incomplete. Are there any questions now, Ryan? Do you have any questions for us here?
Not specifically to your portion. I'm replying to one in the chat right now. So
okay, all righty. I think that's all I have for the rental and for the unfunded. I don't think that I prepared one specifically for unfunded new construction. But again, it's pretty much the same application that Kevin started out with, except you're asking for financing. So if it's unfunded new construction and you're not talking about rental, but talking about new construction for home ownership, single family, it's pretty much the same application. And I will stop sharing my screen in a second.
Thank you, Matthew.
All righty.
I'm going to take over and go through a little bit more detail about our Minneapolis Homes financing application and the pro forma that you would complete if you're applying for financing through that program. So I'm just going to pull up those items. And first, I'm just going to reiterate a couple points of the application, its webpage itself. So let's just open that back up. And I'm going to share my screen here again. So if you're applying through the Minneapolis Homes financing program, you would click on, here, let me see if I can make this show up a little bit better for everyone. Okay. Hopefully that's appearing a little bit better now. You would click on the affordable homeownership page of our Minneapolis Homes financing program, or of our Minneapolis Homes webpage. And to apply for that program, you would complete the application documents. So Matthew was just covering our cash flow, which is specific to our rental projects, which do not have financing available for them. If you were looking at applying for city financing, then you would have to build a homeownership project that is for sale to 80% AMI or below households. And you can propose a project that is more than one unit and is selling a mix of affordable units and units that are above that affordable limit, but the financing that you can request is specific to only the affordable units. On that webpage, there's a section called the Ownership Subsidy and Affordable Sales Price Limits, and I'm going to open that up because that's a key document to seeing how much financing you can request from the city. So this is our financing ownership subsidy limits and sales prices page. So I'm going to show first kind of at the bottom are the income limits that apply to the program. So when you're applying, you can propose to serve an 80% AMI household or below, 60% AMI household or below, or a 40% AMI household below. And AMI is area median income, and that effectively is the maximum income of the household that you can serve, depending on which income range you are targeting. And so depending on the income range that you are targeting or you're planning to sell the housing units that you are building to, you would then be able to ask for a specific amount of financing based on that income range and then the size of the unit. So this 80% AMI range here at the top has different amounts of subsidy that is available at the studio 1, 2, 3, and 4+ unit range. And so if we're looking at a 3-bedroom unit as an example, that property has up to, and I think I've got, nope, there we go, has $115,000 of subsidy that's available. And the target sales price that you would have to be targeting when you're setting up your pro forma, which we'll go through here in just a second, is based on that $272,000. So you can't put in a sales price that's above that limit if you're targeting that income range. And so that'll fluctuate based on the income range and the unit size of the project that you're targeting to build. So I'm going to actually open up our pro forma and walk through that because that's probably one of the most important parts of our application and is where we see the most mistakes. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to see if there's any questions that came up that I should respond to. So Ryan, Matthew, or Roxanne, if you wouldn't mind sharing if there are any questions I need to respond to.
Kevin, if you could share a little bit about the design of our program and why recapture is something that's only available in North on city-owned land, and in the remainder of the city we do perpetually affordable housing.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. So over the course of 2019, we did approximately 24 community engagement sessions about the redesign of this program, so our Minneapolis Homes financing program, and how we should structure how we provide financing to projects. We heard from that feedback, which included engagement sessions with the public and in-person sessions that took place in locations in both South Minneapolis and North Minneapolis, engagement sessions that were involving stakeholders and as well as developers that have participated in the program in the past and nonprofits, service providers. And during those sessions, we heard very clearly a priority to serve households with deeper needs of affordability. And in order to do that, that is where the perpetually affordable housing program was created, based on that feedback that was provided by the public that engaged in those sessions, as well as the providers doing the work. And so the perpetually affordable housing program was developed and designed to help support not just the first home buyer, but subsequent home buyers with both a affordable housing unit through a significant subsidy contribution of the city of at least 20% of the sales price, to help that household purchase a home and have the opportunity to access some equity building through that, through a limited equity model, either through a city approved provider or through the city's model itself. And so that program effectively is existing to serve households that, but for that program, may not be able to access, or most likely would not be able to access homeownership without that city contribution. However, we did hear specifically from residents and those in North Minneapolis that due to the significant disinvestment that has historically happened in North Minneapolis and the after effects of events like the 2011 tornado, that it's important that we have a mix of both the perpetually affordable housing option and a recapture model, which is where we're providing down payment assistance that is then recaptured after that first sale, and then that household can sell to any household regardless of income, is a specific tool of providing the opportunity and flexibility within North Minneapolis specifically. And so the goal of the program is to provide those two pathways and then ensure that the city investments that are making are serving as many affordable ownership households as possible. And I see that there might be a couple more questions that have come in since I've been answering that one. So I'll pause before I start.
Yes, Kevin, there's an additional question. Do all of this existing properties, existing city-owned properties, have city water and sewer service connectable to the building? I think that actually may be a question for you, Matthew, about our vacant buildings that we're offering.
The shorter answer is that yes, and qualified. In a few cases where the city had scheduled to demolish a property, we may have already taken out the water and sewer connections to the street. But in most cases where we have a property and we don't have it on the schedule for demolition, the water and sewer connections are still there. We do require, as a matter of fact, as part of our scope of work, and you'll find in the program manual that any developer who takes on one of these properties has to show proof that they've cleaned out the existing water and sewer line to the street. So as I said, in most cases, the answer is yes, those utilities still exist.
And those are all of the questions that we've received so far. So go ahead and continue, Kevin.
Great, thank you. So the document I have open is our home ownership project Proforma. So this would apply if you are looking at developing a homeownership project and you're asking for financing related to that project. And there are a couple of different pathways that you can take when you're applying for financing. And so this area at the top includes just providing the address of the project that you're applying for. You would complete this pro forma for each project that you do apply for, and then selecting the type of project that it is. So in some cases, you may be applying to do ownership with some rental units, and so you would put an X there, and then you complete the rental tab at the bottom as well as the project budget. The example I'm going to walk through is the most common one, which is for sale ownership. And then we also have a stabilization program, which is for stabilizing occupied units. So that would be either households that are in need of financing to remain in their home, or renters that are looking to acquire and purchase their building for ownership, for home ownership specifically. So in this particular example, I'm going to walk through, this is a project with 2 units, and the Proforma is broken out into sections. The only thing that you need to focus in on as you're completing it is, or maybe I shouldn't say the only thing, but there are kind of 3 different timelines within the project. We're specifically looking at the application budget itself. And so that is this column E, which I filled out. And so you would put in the the acquisition cost of the property, if and that would want to make sure that that's matching the sale price of the city-owned property if you're purchasing that, and then listing any closing fees related to that. We then want to look at your hard construction costs, and if you are a general contractor that is self-performing as well as the developer, then you would break out your fee for performing as a general contractor and list that in this section here. There are limits within our program that cap it at 8% of the construction costs for how much you can charge as a general contractor for a fee to perform that service. We then have a section for soil corrections. So if you anticipate the need to do corrections on soil, so that could be related to concerns related to unsuitable soils, or if you're needing to strengthen the soil to hold up the foundation. And when we do receive a property offer, we do order soil tests. So that's one thing just to keep in mind, and we will provide that to you if you are recommended for approval. And then if you are getting in-kind labor materials, that's another section you can fill out, but that's typically not common for most applicants, so it's not filled out. And then we have a section for the contingency, which is for kind of unforeseen costs related to construction, and there is a cap related to that. That's 10% for rehab or 5% for new construction. And so the entirety of that is your total hard construction costs. And then we have a section that is for your soft construction costs, and that includes things like architectural, legal fees, your green certification. So that would be working with a certifier to certify it is either Green Communities compliant or meeting the Department of Energy Net Zero Energy Ready requirements, depending on the type of project you're proposing. And then you can then put in your realtor fee, and there is a limit on 7% of marketing and staging costs of the sales price, which I'll show where that goes in this pro forma here in a little bit. And then this particular project that I am demonstrating is a perpetually affordable housing program project. And so there are some fees that come along with that for the organization that's administering the perpetually affordable housing model that you go with, and you can put those in the pro forma. So in this particular example, there's a one-time fee charged to the developer by either City of Lakes Community Land Trust or Build Wealth of Minnesota, which are the 2 organizations that are currently approved to operate the city's model. And then the City of Lakes also operates their own perpetually affordable housing model. And I'll show where you can find those fees on our webpage here in a bit. But you would put that here, and that's an allowable cost on the pro forma. And then there are some limits on the amount of total development costs that soft costs can make up as well. And then further along in the pro forma, you would put your developer fee. If you're building a project that is 9 units or less, you're capped at a 10% developer fee. And then if you're doing a project of 10 units or more, it's capped at 15%. Bear in mind that if you're doing a larger project, you can exceed the 10% here, but if you do, it's going to show up in red. So I'm just going to provide an example here by changing this to show one way that the pro forma does a check. So if we put in a larger developer fee here, you can see that it turns red. So in that case, this would only be allowed if the project is 10 units or more. Further along, we then have sections for your sources, and those are your interim financing sources, which is really your sources of financing as you are constructing the project. And then we have a permanent financing section, which is your sources once you've completed and you're selling the unit or units of the project. So in this particular example, the applicant is asking for a combined amount of $293,545 from the city. And that would be a combination of both the project and affordability gap that's available to the project. The developer then would need to provide documentation of financing. And in this case, that's a $306,000 construction loan. So we would want to see documentation with your application that's stated within 90 days of the application that says that you have a conditional letter or a pre-approval letter or something of that nature that shows construction financing of that amount or more. And then you are able to defer some costs as part of your construction. So in this particular example, this applicant deferred their developer fee as well as their realtor and marketing fees and costs because this is interim sources while you're constructing, and those are paid at closing, which is a permanent financing section. And so then when we're looking at the permanent financing section, you do break out the city project and affordability gap and put them in their respective sections here, and they connect to this ownership section, which I'm going to go to in just a second. And then you would put in the buyer's first mortgage amount. In this case, this is the combination of 2 units that are being sold. And then if you are using other sources to leverage them for affordability gap or project gap, you would list those in these sections here. And you can add more detail by filling it in. In this particular case, I put in $30,000, which is coming from the Minnesota Housing Impact Fund. Before I go over to the ownership tab, I want to see if there are any questions about this page. Roxanne or Matthew, are there any questions we need to respond to?
There was a question about who the 2 organizations are that are administrators of perpetually affordable housing.
Oh, yes. So we have 2 administrators of the city-sponsored model, which is this Build Wealth of Minnesota and City of Lakes Community Land Trust. I'm going to show the information about those models and their contact information and the fees that are related to them just here, and I can do that just in a second after we go through this pro forma. And we'll cover a little bit more detail about that here in just a little bit. Were there any other questions? Okay, I'm going to take silence as the opportunity to move on, but before I go to that next section, keep in mind when you are submitting this document, we do need you to fill out a signature. You can do it electronically here by typing your name and date and then submitting that. We do want to receive the Excel version of this document when you're submitting it. So I know in some instances we've had applicants that convert it to PDF. Please do submit it in the original format that it is downloaded from the city's webpage.
There is an additional question, Kevin. about whether there should be an addendum with a listing of all the sources of financing if it's a group of owners.
And I'm wondering if that's related to like a stabilization proposal or cooperative. So I think that additional detail of sort of what kind of development it is would be able to, or help me respond to that question with a little bit more detail.
And then there's an additional request. Can you repeat the construction loan again?
Sure. So and maybe I'll go to our webpage that kind of lists what is allowed for construction financing. So I'm going to just do that. And I think that will also kind of answer that first question as well. So let's do that. I'm going to just flip my screen real quick. So if you scroll down on our webpage, it has the application documents and what's required. So you'll see here, and I'm going to scroll in a little bit or zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. You have documentation of financing, and it lists the type of documentation that's allowed. And then while I'm on this page, it's kind of buried, but I'm going to show where the perpetually affordable housing program information is, which it's actually in a couple of places. So if you're clicking in our stabilization training slides, you can click in there and it shows the perpetual affordable housing contact information for the 2 organizations that are currently approved. Or you can go into additional resources and then scroll down to perpetually affordable housing admin contact and fees. And it'll open this page which shows the contact information for the 2 administrators, and then the 2 models that they operate. So both Build Wealth Minnesota and City of Lakes Community Land Trust operate the city's model, which is a 2% annual compounded fixed rate formula. And then City of Lakes also has a program where they do a land lease, and that's 25% of the value increase, and it's an appraisal-based formula. And there are different fees that are applicable to each. And so you'll notice that the initial sale fee is the cost to the developer, and that's what I put in the pro forma. So in this case, that was the $5,500 that you see listed here.
So Kevin, the person who is asking about a group of owners is asking specifically about a situation where there's a condo association with independent financing for each of the owners that end up being purchasers.
Oh, okay. So it's would this be?
I'm going to suggest that for this scenario, it may be best to connect with our staff offline. I'll say generally for a condo association, there would be a need to show what the interim financing source would be during construction, or if the intent is for this to be a stabilization proposal, then it would need to be something that's if it's a stabilization proposal, then it would be possible to demonstrate financing once those owners are identified. So it gets a little complicated, and I think we probably need to understand more specifically what the scenario is. Next question is there city coordination with new homebuyer education organizations to inform potential buyers about upcoming affordable units, or do buyers simply hear about these on the MLS?
That's a great question. The city is part of its services does support homebuyer education and counseling providers. And so those providers are providing homebuyer education services such as the home stretch workshop that would-be prospective homebuyers use to learn about the home buying process. So working with the realtor, with a lender, kind of what to expect during the home buying process. And that's a requirement of the financing program that a applicant that's looking to purchase a property either participates in, receives a certificate of participation from either the home stretch or framework courses. So that is something that does occur and would be incorporated into the program. And then we also refer people to, and that would be prospective buyers, to homeownership education and counselors if they're asking questions about down payment assistance or other resources, especially if they're just starting on their journey looking towards homeownership, so that they're having an advisor that can help them navigate and provide them resources beyond just what the city provides. And then we also do list our properties that are being developed on our webpage. And I can show that later as well. And then finally, as you mentioned, that information can also be found on the MLS once those properties are listed.
There's a question, if I need help for the application process, is there any help?
Certainly, our staff are very happy to connect with you and answer your questions. We can't fill out the documentation for you, but we can certainly kind of walk through and learn more about what your proposal is and talk through the needed documentation specific to that proposal. I know myself or Matthew are happy to speak with you about the specific proposal depending on the proposal type. So I would handle applications that are for financing, and Matthew handles our unfunded property sales. And I will list our contact information at the end of this presentation.
I would also add that we would expect anybody who needs help to actually have started on the application process. It's best to have at least, a draft of your application done, so we have something to work with you and review, rather than coming in with an idea or asking when you haven't done any work yet. So we do want you to put in some of the work there, and we will help, to say these are things that would probably strengthen or help you, figure out how to do, the calculations, things like that. But we do absolutely expect that people will get started on these and then get them to us well before the deadline.
And if you're just kind of getting started and you're not quite sure, or you're new to development, this isn't going to be the only opportunity that the city provides. So this program operates on basically an annual cycle. And so if you missed this application, I know it's coming up here pretty quickly. There will be future opportunities, and I would definitely encourage you to sign up for a newsletter, which is on the MinneapolisHomes.org webpage at the bottom, just to make sure that you're notified when those opportunities do come up.
And again, when it comes to the unfunded rehabs, it's critical that if you're new to this process, that you find a general contractor who has some experience in doing this, because they would be the one who would be filling out the majority of the application. Except for your personal information, they would know how to fill out the application and present it in such a way that it has a chance for being considered.
Great. So I'm going to go through the remainder of the proforma here. So there are different tabs based on the type of development that you're proposing. The ownership tab is the most frequent and the most detailed, and this is also the tab that kind of lets you check your work a little bit too. So in this particular example that I framed, this is a perpetually affordable housing program example. So I went in and selected perpetually affordable housing. But let's say I change that to recapture. You're going to see over here that there's a compliance validation check section right here. And one of the requirements of recapture is that the city's affordability gap that's provided is equal or less than 15% of appraised value. Because I was doing perpetually affordable housing, the city is providing a deeper subsidy to the home buyer to help them afford the property. And so when I made that change from perpetually affordable to recapture, the amount of affordability gap exceeds that 15% limit. And that's why you're seeing this turn red right here. So I'm going to put it back to perpetually affordable housing. And you would fill in the unit information. So you break that down based on the unit size and then the number of units. And then the household area median income that you're planning on serving. In this particular example, it's a 60% AMI household with those units. And so then I put in the appraised value. You would use that based on the BPO or the broker's price opinion, the appraisal, or the competitive market analysis that you're obtaining to get this value. And then you would put in the estimated mortgage, which actually comes from, cannot exceed the affordable sales price limit that was on that sheet I showed earlier, which was our subsidy and sales price limits. So for a 60% AMI household, that limit for a 2-bedroom unit is $161,500. And that's matching this perpetually affordable sales price that's listed here. And then that information carries down here, which is then the gap that's provided. And so you can see in this particular scenario, there's a difference of $63,500 between the sales price and then what that buyer can afford. So that pulls down here, and that's the affordability gap. And then if you're leveraging external sources of affordability gap, which is just to reiterate, affordability gap is the difference between the fair market value and what that household can afford. If you're leveraging external sources, you would put that here. And when I did that, that changed the amount of affordability gap that you're requesting from the city. So if that was 0, then that would stay at the same amount as the total gap. But because you're requesting, in this example, you're using $15,000 from an additional source, that auto calculates. And then the affordability gap total goes in here, and that's an auto calculation. So you're filling in anything that is in blue, and then anything that's in gray, you're not filling in. And then these calculations over here will help you determine if you're compliant with the different requirements. So it's checking if your gap that's requested meets the program requirements and doesn't exceed the max gap that's available. If it's a perpetually affordable housing program, it's making sure that the gap is at least 20% of the appraised value for affordability gap, which it is. And in this case, it's 28 and 25%. And then it's checking if the homebuyer mortgages and the amounts meet or make sure that they don't exceed the maximum price. And then it's also checking to make sure that you did the financing sources correct and that those are sufficient. So if you see any of these sections in red, then that's telling you you did something wrong. One reason that, and then if we do perpetually affordable housing, which is this particular example, you'll see they're all in green. So this example has no issues. So that's the way you can do a compliance check. And then another way you can do a check is making sure that the total requested here that you're looking at matches the amount that you're putting in this section right here. And then if you are doing a rental, ownership with rental, you would then fill in the information about the rental units. And then this net monthly rent is what is then included as part of your income for calculation purposes. So let's say you're looking at building a duplex and you are renting one of the units and living in one of them. You would want to make sure that with this net monthly rent amount, that your income doesn't exceed the income limits of the program. And then if you're doing a stabilization proposal, you would just fill out this section, which is about the fair market value of the property, and then whether or not it would be for refinancing debt or for financing to rehabilitate a property, etc. And then there's also this 20% test because stabilization proposals require a perpetually affordable housing model. So I'm going to close or actually before I close that, I'm going to see if there are any additional questions about the Proforma and its related tabs.
There are not questions that are in the queue at the moment, Kevin.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to our application webpage and just show a couple things, some of which we kind of discussed and a few more that are new. So there's a section here under applicant documents, and that is the CHODO or CBDO certification. And effectively what that is there are certifications that you could complete that you would then submit along with your application. And if you meet the certification requirements, that would allow you to possibly access a pool of federal funds that the city allocates. And it effectively makes your application somewhat more competitive because the city has requirements to provide those federal funds, or I should say a portion of those federal funds, to either a community housing development organization, which is a CHODO, and that's for nonprofits only, or a community-based development organization, which is a certification for either nonprofits or for-profit entities. So I would encourage you, if you're through your application, that's something to take a look at, but I would first, if you're just kind of getting started and completing your application, wait to take a look at these until later. And then if you are a previous applicant that was funded, an additional document that is new this year is the project timeline. And what that is that's a timeline of the timeline of the projects that you were previously funded for through the city, of the plan for completion and when you expect to complete those projects. So it's a kind of a capacity analysis that the city is doing as part of your application. And then there are some additional resources here too. So this is primarily if you're a developer that is funded, but that's there are additional resources that exist there. I don't think if you're just getting ready to apply that you need to take a look at it, but it's always there as a helpful resource if you are awarded. And then under the additional resources section, let's say if you're trying to determine if you're doing perpetually affordable housing, you can click on those fees. Or there was a question about homes developed through the program. You can click on this link, and then this worksheet shows the list of addresses that are under construction or recently completed through the program, and the contact information for the developers. This list is updated from city system, so it's possible some of these homes may have been listed and just recently sold, but it's always helpful if you're interested in the property or see it listed here to reach out to the developer to learn more if you are a prospective home buyer. And the next thing we're going to talk about, and then we're kind of nearing the end of our time here, is our stabilization program. So I'm just going to pull up a little bit more detail about that in our application to make sure if you're a stabilization proposal that you're understanding what's required. Bear with me 1 second. Open back up this document. So if you're doing stabilization, there is a separate section on the application. So you would scroll down to stabilization here. And stabilization requires perpetually affordable housing, which we framed previously. You would select which model you are planning on using. So there's the city perpetually affordable housing model administered by both BuildWealth and CLCLT. If you're planning on doing perpetually affordable housing, please reach out to those organizations before you apply so that they're aware and are able to speak to you a little bit more in detail about what working with them would look like. Or you can submit documentation of a new model. So this would be, an example would be like a cooperative housing model. And so we would want to see documentation of what that model looks like and the legal documents that you would use to maintain affordability into perpetuity. And then you're listing the addresses of the project and then the number of units and the AMI that you're targeting. And then if there are like fees for paying off delinquent taxes or HOA fees or things like that, you would want to ensure that you're looking at this, checking that, and providing the applicable documentation. And then for each application, whether or not it's stabilization or otherwise, you would sign this compliance acknowledgement and then submit that. And then if you are a owner occupant, so let's say you're planning to apply as an owner occupant, you also need to complete this income qualification section. And with that, I'm going to show our contact information so that we've got that available.
And if there are any final questions, please go ahead and submit them in the queue. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in the conversation today. I'm not seeing any questions at this point, Kevin.
Great. Well, I'll reiterate a few things before we end tonight. So a reminder that the application closes on January 7th at 1:00 p.m. and you would submit your application to MPLS Homes at minneapolismn.gov. And you would want to make sure that you're including all the documentation that's listed in, you can use the application checklist, or you can also look at the section on the web page where it says documentation. And then we will then review applications that are received and follow up with applicants if there's any questions or documentation questions related to what's sent. And Matthew, myself, and Ryan are happy to respond to any questions that you have in the interim. And as Matthew framed, if you are kind of just getting started, please take a look at the other resources that are on our webpage. So we have the training materials that include pre-recorded YouTube trainings. They include the actual slides and the presentations themselves. And then we'll also be posting this presentation to the webpage here shortly. And with that, I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.